Shabbat Shalom. Delighted for those of you who can be here today in person for this Simply Shabbat worship. And for those of you who might be watching remotely, we're just trying to see how this might be more interactive. If you can come up with some ideas, we'd be glad to have them. But meanwhile, if you want to say Shabbat Shalom in the comments or in the chat and say where you're watching from. Maybe you're watching from Mount Laurel, or maybe you're watching from further away. So we turn now in our Siddur to page 190, and for those of you who are still putting on your talit and want to join together in the blessing, feel free to join me. Bless Adonai, O my soul, Adonai, my God, how great you are. You are robed in glory and majesty, wrapping yourself in light as in a garment, spreading forth the heavens like a curtain. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kidshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu lehitatef batzitzit. As we turn to back to page 186. Moda'ani lefanecha melech chai v'kayam shehechezarta binishmati bechemla rabba emunatecha rabba emunatecha. On page 193. May the one whose spirit is with us in every righteous deed be with all who work for the good of humanity and bear the burdens of others, and who give bread to the hungry, who clothe the naked, and take the friendless into their homes. May the work of their hands endure, and may the seed they sow bring abundant harvest. On page 194. Praise to you, Adonai, our God, sovereign of the universe, who formed the human body with skill, creating the body's many pathways and openings. It is well known before your throne of glory that if one of them be wrongly opened or closed, it would be impossible to endure and stand before you. Blessed are you, Adonai, who heals all flesh, working wondrously. Baruch atah Adonai, rofecho basar umafli la'asot. On page 197. Matter is never destroyed, only transformed. So too can the soul evolve higher and higher, from instinct to inspiration, haughtiness to holiness, selfishness to service, from individualism to union, to join with the soul of souls, the infinite one. As the soul is magnified and sanctified, so is the infinite one exalted. Baruch atah Adonai, asher biyado nefesh kol chai, v'ruach kol besar ish. As we turn now to the Nisim B'chol Yom, the miracles of every day, I would ask if there's any daily miracle, or maybe greater than a daily miracle, good news that has happened to you over the past week. Your daughter is up visiting with you? From Maryland. Lovely news. Thank you. Other things to share? So we thank God also for those daily miracles, like being able to walk and breathe, open our eyes, and we join in the Nisim B'chol Yom. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher natan l'sech bivina, lahavchin bein yom uvein laila. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, Pokeach ivri. Amen. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam matir asurim. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam zokev kefufim. Amen. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam rokah haaretz al hamayim. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam hamechim mitzadeka. Amen. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam malbish arumim. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam hanoten le'ya'ef. Amen. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam hama'avir sheina me'enai udnuma me'afapai. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam shasani mitzalim Elohim. Amen. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam shasani bat chorin. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam shasani Yisrael. Amen. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam ozer Yisrael bigvura. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam oter Yisrael b'tifara. Amen. On page 204. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kidshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. O Adonai, our God, let the words of Torah be sweet in our mouths and in the mouths of your people Israel, so that we, our descendants, and the descendants of all your people Israel, may know you by studying your Torah for its own sake. Blessed are you, Adonai, who teaches Torah to your people Israel. Baruch atah Adonai, hamlamed Torah le'amo Yisrael. On page 207. There are 8 degrees in the giving of tzedakah, each one higher than the one before: to give grudgingly, reluctantly, or with regret; to give less than one should, but with grace; to give what one should, but only after being asked; to give before one is asked; to give without knowing who will receive it, although the recipient knows the identity of the giver; to give without making known one's identity; to give so that neither the giver nor receiver knows the identity of the other; to help one another to become self-supporting by means of a gift, a loan, or by finding employment for the one in need. We turn now to page 215, 215 for Ashrei. Ashrei yoshvei beitecha, od yahalelucha selah. Ashrei ham shekacha lo, Ashrei ham shadonai Elohav. Tila leDavid, aromimcha Elohai hamelech, vavarcha shimcha leolam va'ed. B'chol yom avarchecha, v'yalela shimcha leolam va'ed. Gadol Adonai umhulam me'od, v'ligdulato ein cheker. Dor ledor yishabach ma'asecha, u'gvurotecha yagidu. Adar kevod hodecha, v'divrei niflotecha asicha. V'zuz norotecha yomeru, u'dlatcha asaprena. Zecher rav tuvcha yabiu, v'tzitkatcha yiranenu. Chanun v'rachum Adonai, erech apayim ugdol chesed. Tov Adonai lakol, v'rachamav al kol ma'asav. Yoducha Adonai kol ma'asecha, v'chasidecha yavarchucha. Kevod malchutcha yomeru, ugvuratcha yidaberu. V'hodia livnei adam gevurotav, uvod hadar malchuto. Malchutcha malchut kol olamim, umemshaltecha bechol dor v'ador. Somech Adonai l'chol hanoflim, v'zokev l'chol hakfufim. Einei chol elecha yisaberu, v'ata noten lahem et ochlam be'ito. פותח את ידיך ומשביח לכוחי רצון. צדיק אדוני בכל דרכיו וחסיד בכל מעשיו. קרוב אדוני לכל קוריו לכל אשר יקראו באמת. רצון יראיו יעשה ואת שבתם ישמע ויושיעם. שומר אדוני את כל אוהביו ואת כל הרשעים ישמיע. תהילת אדוני ידבר פי ויברך כל בשר שם קודשו לעולם ועד. ואנחנו נברך יה מעתה ועד עולם. Hallelujah. On page 224, as we are able, we rise. Yitgadal v'yitkadash shemei rabbav v'yalmad divrach yirutei v'yamlich malchutei v'chayechon uvyomechon uchayei dechol be'Yisrael ba'agala uvizman kariv v'imeru amen. Yehei shmei rabba mevorach leolam ulol nehamaya yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpa'ar v'yitromam v'yitnasei v'yitadar v'yitalev v'yitalal shemei dekudesha b'richu leila min kol berchata v'shirata tushbechata v'nechemata damiran bialma v'meru amen. Ya la 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 ya la 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 ya la 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 ya la 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 ya la 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 ya la 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 ya la 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 ya la 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 ya la 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 ya la 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 ya la 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 ya la 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 la. Baruch hu et Adonai hamivorach. On page 228. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam yotzer or uvorei choshech oseh shalom uvorei et hakol. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam Yotzer or uvorei choshech oseh shalom uvorei et hakol. Hameir la'aretz v'ladarim aleha barachamim uvtuvo mechadesh b'chol yom tamid ma'aseh v'reishit. Ma rabu ma'asecha Adonai kulam b'chochma asita mala ha'aretz kinyanecha titbarach Adonai Eloheinu al shevach ma'aseh yadecha ve'al ma'orei or she'asita yifarucha selah. Or chadash al Tzion ta'ir v'nizkeh chulanu mehera leoro. Baruch atah Adonai yotzer hameorot. On page 231. Once or twice in a lifetime, a man or woman may choose a radical leaving, having heard, Lech Lecha, go forth. God disturbs us toward our destiny by hard events and by freedom's now urgent voice, which explode and confirm who we are. We don't like leaving, but God loves becoming. Baruch atah Adonai, habocher bi'amo Yisrael bi'ahava. Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai echad. 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 Baruch Shem Kevod Malchuto Leolam Vaed. May be seated. Ve'avta et Adonai Elohecha v'chol levavcha v'chol nafshecha u'v'chol meodecha v'hayu hadivarim ha'ele asher anochi mitzavecha hayom al levavecha v'shinantam levanecha v'dibarta bam v'shivtecha b'veitecha uvlechtecha v'derech uv'shochbecha uv'kumecha ukshartam leot ayadecha v'hayu letotafot beinenecha uchtavtam amazuzot beitecha uvisharecha leman tizkeru v'asitem et kol mitzvotai v'tem kedoshim lelohechem ani Adonai Elohechem asher hotzeiti etchem me'eretz Mitzrayim liot lachem lelohim ani Adonai Elohechem. On page 237. If people fall, can they not also rise? If they break away, can they not return? The stork in the sky knows when to migrate. The dove and the swallow know the season of return. What human instinct knows the time to turn back? What cue sparks the conscience of the soul? We pray to sense this day anew, attuned to the call of sacred living. On page 239. Emet, there is no place where you are not. Even in the wilderness, there is your word. Emet, that pen strokes of lightning, white fire, black flame, stir the soul's passion, guide our sacred way. True and enduring is Torah. Your truth for us is certain and established now and forevermore. Like Moses, Miriam, and all Israel, we sing out and rejoice. Mi chamocha ba'elim Adonai, mi kamocha nehador b'kodesh, norat tehilot osef eleh, norat tehilot osef eleh. Shira chadasha shibechu gehulim, l'shimcha svat hayam, yachad kulam hodu, v'him lechu ve'ameru, Adonai imlo le'olam va'ed, Adonai imlo le'olam va'ed. Ya la 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 la, ya la la ya la 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 la, ya la 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 la, ya la 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 la, ya la la la, ya la 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 la. Sur Yisrael, Kuma be'ezrat Yisrael, Uvdechinu mecha, Yehuda ve'Yisrael, Go aleinu, Adonai Tzevahot Shemo, Kedosh Yisrael, Baruch atah Adonai, Ga'al Yisrael. As we are able, we rise for Tefillah, page 242. Adonai sifatai tiftachu fi yagita hilatecha. Adonai sifatai tiftachu fi yagita hilatecha. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu v'Elohei avotenu v'imotenu Elohei Avraham Elohei Yitzchak v'Elohei Yaakov Elohei Sarah Elohei Rivka Elohei Rachel v'Elohei Leah Ha'el HaGadol HaGibor v'Hanurah El Elyon Gomel Chasadim Tovim V'Konei HaKol V'Zocher Chastei Avot V'Imahot Umevi Geula Livnei V'neihem Leman Shemo B'Ahava Melech Ozer Umoshia Umagen Baruch atah Adonai Magen Avraham V'Ezrat Sarah Atah Gibor Leolam Adonai Mechaye HaKol Atah Rav Lehoshia Morid Hatal Mechalkel Chaim Bechesed Mechaye HaKol Berachamim Rabim Somech Noflim V'Rofech Olim Umatir Asurim Umekayem emunato lishenei afar michamocha bal gevurot umido melach melech memit umechayeh umatzmiach Yeshua v'ne'eman atah le'achayot hakol Baruch atah Adonai Mechaye HaKol Nekadesh et Shemcha ba'olam Keshem shemakdishim oto b'shmei marom Kakatuv ayad neviecha V'kara ze el ze ve'amar Kadosh, Kadosh, Kadosh Adonai Tzevaot Meloch haaretz Kevodo Adir Adirenu Adonai Adonenu Madir Shimcha B'chol haaretz Baruch Kevod Adonai Mimkomo Echadu Eloheinu, Hu Avinu Malkeinu, Hu Moshienu v'Hu Yashmienu, V'rachamav Leinei Kol Chai. Ani Adonai Elohechem, Yimloch Adonai Leolam, Elohai Yichzion, Ledor vador, hallelujah. Ledor vador nagid god lecha, ulenetzach netzachim kedushatcha nakdish, v'shivchacha Eloheinu, mipinu lo yamush leolam va'ed. Baruch atah Adonai, Ha'el HaKadosh. May be seated. On page 250. Yismechu v'malechutecha shomrei 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 Shabbat v'korei oneg Shabbat. Yismechu v'malechutecha shomrei 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 Shabbat v'korei oneg Shabbat. Mekadashei Mekadashei Shavi Shabbat Kulam Yisbe'u Ve'itangu Mituvecha Shabbat Yismechu V'malechutecha Shomrei 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 Shabbat V'korei Oneg Shabbat Yismechu V'malechutecha Shomrei 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 Shabbat V'korei Oneg Shabbat V'hashvi Ratzita bo v'kidashto Shabbat Chemdad Yamim Oto karata Shabbat Yismechu v'malechutecha Shomrei 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 Shabbat v'korei Oneg Shabbat Yismechu v'malechutecha Shomrei 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 Shabbat v'korei Oneg Shabbat Zecher Lema'aseh v'reishit Shabbat Zecher Lema'aseh v'reishit Shabbat Yismechu v'malechutecha Shomrei 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 Shabbat v'korei Oneg Shabbat Yismechu v'malechutecha Shomrei 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 Shabbat v'korei Oneg Shabbat. On page 251. We are a people in whom the past endures, in whom the present is inconceivable without moments gone by. The Exodus lasted a moment enduring forever. What happened once upon a time happens all the time. On page 253. We offer thanks, O God, for the Shabbat, which unites us in faith and hope, for Shabbat holiness, which inspires sacred living, for Shabbat memories glowing even in darkness, for Shabbat peace born of friendship and love. We offer thanks and blessing, O God. Baruch atah Adonai, Mekadesh HaShabbat. On page 255. On this holy Shabbat, may we draw nearer to life, to peace, and to joy. May we find true rest, holiness in our deeds, worth in our study of Torah. Let us feed on the love of goodness. Let us drink from the love of goodness, restrain our thirst for excess, and cleanse our hearts to serve life well. On this holy Shabbat, may we draw nearer in life, in peace, and in joy. Baruch atah Adonai, shotecha levadcha b'yir'ah na'avod. As we continue on page 257, I can't help but continue to think about the new telescope as we read the first words of the top of the page. For the expanding grandeur of creation, worlds known and unknown, galaxies beyond galaxies, filling us with awe and challenging our imaginations. Modim anachnu lach. For this fragile planet Earth, its times and tides, its sunsets and seasons, Modim anachnu lach. For the joy of human life, its wonders and surprises, its hopes and achievements, Modim anachnu lach. For human community, our common past and future hope, our oneness transcending all separation, our capacity to work for peace and justice in the midst of hostility and oppression, Modim anachnu lach. For high hopes and noble causes, for faith without fanaticism, for understanding of views not shared, Modim anachnu lach. For all who have labored and suffered for a fairer world, who have lived so that others might live in dignity and freedom, Modim anachnu lach. For human liberties and sacred rights, for opportunities to change and grow, to affirm and choose, Modim anachnu lach. We pray that we may live not by our fears, but by our hopes, not by our words, but by our deeds. Blessed are you, Adonai. Your name is goodness, and you are worthy of thanksgiving. Baruch atah Adonai, hatov shimcha l'chana elehodot. Sim shalom, tova uvracha. Sim shalom, tova uvracha. Sim shalom, tova uvracha. Sim shalom, tova uvracha. Chen v'chesed, chen v'chesed v'rachamim. Chen v'chesed, chen v'chesed v'rachamim, v'rachamim. Sim shalom, tova uvracha. Sim shalom, tova uvracha. Aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael. Aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael. Amecha. Sim shalom, tova uvracha. Sim shalom, tova uvracha. Baruch atah Adonai, hamvarech et amo Yisrael, Bashalom. We continue our prayer silently, whether we are led by the words on the pages of our Siddur through page 261, or other prayers throughout the prayer book, or those meditations and thoughts in our hearts. Imre fi, Imre fi, libi, lifanecha, Adonai, Adonai, Suri, Vegoali, Vegoali. We turn now to page 362 for Seder Kriyat HaTorah, for the reading of Torah. As we rise, I invite Larry to come onto the bima to help me with the Torah. Ein kamocha va'Elohim Adonai, v'ein kemasecha, malchutecha malchut kol olamim, umemshaltecha b'chol dor v'dor. Adonai melech, Adonai malach, Adonai himloch leolam va'ed. Adonai oz le'amo yitain, Adonai yevarech et amo v'shalom. El harachamim heitiv avertzoncha et Zion. Tivnei chomot Yerushalayim, Tivnei chomot Yerushalayim, ki becha levad batachnu, melech elram v'nisa adon olamim. Ki mitzion tetzei Torah, Ki mitzion tetzei Torah, udevar Adonai mirushalayim. Baruch shenatan Torah, Torah. Baruch shenatan Torah, Torah. Le'amo Yisrael b'kedushato. Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai echad, echad Eloheinu, Gadol Adonenu, Kadosh Shemo. Gadol Adonai iti, uneromema Shemo yachdav. Lecha hagedula v'hagevura v'hatiferet v'hanetzach v'hahod. Ki chol b'shamayim u'ba'aretz, ki chol b'shamayim u'ba'aretz. Lecha amlacha v'amid na'aseh lechol erosh. Al shlosha devarim, al shlosha devarim, al shlosha devarim ha'olam, ha'olam omed. Al shlosha devarim, al shlosha devarim, al shlosha devarim ha'olam, ha'olam omed. verse 15 and following. And there's just so much to talk about in this week's Torah portion. It's hard to narrow it down. So this week I decided to focus on this part at verse 15 where we're looking to find Moses' successor. Okay, and so for our Aliyah to the Torah, I would invite if there's someone who wants to, take that Aliyah, if Goldie, if you, in honor of your daughter coming up from Maryland, if that's something that you would like the honor of the Aliyah this morning? Okay, and your Hebrew name? Bat? Your parents' Hebrew names? Nala Amod, Goldie Bat Yecheskel, Levarech al HaTorah. Baruch Adonai Barach Le'olam Va'ed. Amen. My apologies, I didn't give us the page number. The page number is 1204, 1204 in the Plowed Chumash. In any Tanakh or Torah, it's still Numbers chapter 27, verse 15. Amen. Vayidaber Moshe el Adonai lemor. Yivkod Adonai Elohei haruchot l'chol basar. Ish al ha'edah asher yetzeh lifnehem. Asher yavo lifnehem ve'asher yotzi'em. Ve'asher yivi'em. V'lo tieh adat Adonai katzon asher ein lahem roeh. Vayomer Adonai el Moshe. Kach lecha et Yehoshua bin Nun. Ish asher ruach bo. V'samachta et yadcha alav. V'ha'amadata oto lifnei Elazar HaKohen. V'lifnei kol ha'edah. V'tiveta oto le'enei. V'natata mehodecha alav. Lema'an yishma'u kol adat b'nei Yisrael. V'lifnei Elazar HaKohen ya'amod. V'sha'al lo b'mishpat ha'urim. Lifnei Adonai al piv yetzeu ve'al piv yavo. Hu v'chol b'nei Yisrael ito. V'chol ha'edah. V'ya'as Moshe ka'asher tziva Adonai oto. V'yikach et Yehoshua v'ya'amidehu lifnei Elazar HaKohen v'lifnei kol ha'edah. V'yismoch et yadav alav. V'yitzavehu ka'asher diber Adonai b'yad Moshe. Amen. As we turn to page 370, offering a Mishaberach for Aliyah. Mishaberach avotenu v'imotenu Avraham, Yitzchak v'Yaakov, Sarah, Rivka, Rachel v'Leah, hu yivarech et Goldie bat Yechezkel ba'avor she'alta lichvod hamakon v'lichvod haTorah b'sachar zeh hakadosh b'chol hu yishmereha v'yatzileha mikol tzara utzuka umikol nega umachala v'yishlach baracha v'hatzlacha b'chol ma'aseh yadeha im kol Yisrael v'nomar amen. May the one who blessed our ancestors, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, Sarah, Rebekah, Rachel, and Leah, bless Goldie, daughter of Yechezkel, who has come up to the Torah in honor of God and Torah. May she merit and may God send blessing and success in her every endeavor, together with all of Israel. And let us say, Amen. And we turn now our blessings to those who are in need of healing. And so I share with you this extended Adith Emmanuel family, those we're thinking of this time who are in need of healing. If you're watching us through the blessing of technology, feel free to add the names of your loved ones who are in need of healing so that we might extend our blessings to them. Jeff Schaefer, Lulu Revuela, Marion Gwertz, Aaron Tepper, Lily Tepper, William Broderick, Joan Major, Karen Bowen, Louis Alahat, Mary Parker, Barbara Cohn, Tricia Tepper, Jordan Maverick Steinberg, Carol Schaefer, Harriet Rosenberg, Hudson Hodge, Carrie Basin, Dr. Jerry Herman, Todd Pollard, Murray Kammerman, Mary Mednitsky, Jocelyn Jackson, Jen Jones, Shirley Friedlander, Michael Infanti, Gary Garnick, Sarah Oken, Ann Marsden, Jerry Dreskin, Lynn Romsberg, Rick Ulrich, Ileana Cohen. And if there's other names that we would like to add for those who are here in person, if you'd like to stand and recite their names aloud. Baruch atah Adonai, Rofei HaCholim, as we turn to the middle of page 371. Mi sheberach avoteinu mekor habracha leimotenu. May the source of strength, who bless the ones before us, help us find the courage to make our lives a blessing, and let us say, Amen. Mi sheberach imotenu mekor habracha lavotenu. Bless those in need of healing with refuah shlema, the renewal of body, the renewal of spirit, and let us say, Amen. So, Larry, I'm going to ask if you would come back up to the bima to help as we rise as we're able, lifting and dressing Torah. Vezot HaTorah asher sam Moshe, Vezot HaTorah, Vezot HaTorah asher sam Moshe, Vezot HaTorah, Lifnei b'nei Yisrael, Vezot HaTorah, Al pi Adonai b'yad Moshe, Vezot HaTorah, Vezot HaTorah asher sam Moshe, Vezot HaTorah, Vezot HaTorah asher sam Moshe, Vezot HaTorah, Lifnei b'nei Yisrael, Vezot HaTorah, Al pi Adonai b'yad Moshe, Vezot HaTorah, Vezot HaTorah asher sam Moshe, V'zot HaTorah, V'zot HaTorah asher sam Moshe, V'zot HaTorah. May be seated. As we turn now to our prophetic reading, our words from the Haftarah, which come this Shabbat from 1 Kings, chapter 18 and following. You can find the Haftarah reading on page 1275, 1275 in your Plaut commentary. And in any Tanakh, 1 Kings chapter 18, verse 46 and following. And if you'd like to join along in the blessings for the Haftarah, we're on page 372 in the Siddur. I'm going to Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher bachar b'nviim tovim v'ratza v'divreihem hane'emarim be'emet Baruch atah Adonai habocher b'torah Moshe Avdo, Yisrael Amo, Uvinviei Haemet Vatzedek.
The hand of the Eternal settled on Elijah, and he girded up his loins and ran ahead of King Ahab all the way to Jezreel. When Ahab told Queen Jezebel that all that Elijah had done and how he had put all the prophets of Baal to the sword, Jezebel sent a messenger to Elijah who said, "May the gods do this to me and more if by this time tomorrow I have not done the same thing to your life as you did to the life of one of them." Fearing this, Elijah fled at once for his life. He came to Beersheba in the territory of Judah, and there he left his servant behind. He went on a day's journey into the wilderness. He came and sat under a broom brush and prayed for death, saying, "It is too much. Take my life now, Eternal One. I am no better than my forebears." He lay down under the bush and fell asleep. Suddenly an angel touched him and said, "Get up and eat." When he looked around, and there beside his head was a cake baked on hot stones and a jar of water. After eating and drinking, he lay down again and slept. The angel of the Eternal came a second time and woke him up, saying, "Get up and eat, or the journey will be too much for you." He got up and ate and drank, and that meal gave him enough strength to walk 40 days and nights as far as the mountain of the God at Horeb. There he went into a cave and spent the night. Then the word of the Eternal came to him, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" He answered, "Eternal One, God of the heavens hosts, I have always been devoted to you, only to you. But the people of Israel have broken their covenant with you, torn down your altars, and killed your prophets. I am the only one left, and now they are trying to kill me." And God said, "Go out and stand before me, the Eternal, on the mountaintop." Then the Eternal passed by. A furious wind split mountains and shattered rocks in the presence of the Eternal, but the Eternal was not in the wind. After the wind, an earthquake, but the Eternal was not in the earthquake. After the earthquake, fire, but the Eternal was not in the fire. And after the fire, a still small voice. When Elijah heard it, he wrapped his mantle about his face and went out standing at the entrance of the cave. A voice came to him saying, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" He said, "I have been full of zeal for the Eternal, the God of heaven's host. The people of Israel have broken your covenant, thrown down your altars, and killed your prophets. I am the last one, and they are looking to take my life too." The Eternal said to him, "Go back the way you came to the wilderness of Damascus, and anoint Hazael as king of Aram, and join Joah, son of Nimshi, as king of Israel, and anoint Elisha, son of Shaphat of Abel Maholah, as prophet to take your place. Anyone who escapes death at the hands of Hazael will be killed by Jehu, and anyone who escapes Jehu will be put to death by Elisha. I will leave in Israel only 7,000, all those who did not kneel to Baal, whose lips did not kiss him." He left that place and found Elisha, son of Shaphat, who was plowing. There were 12 pairs of oxen before him, and he was with the 12th. Elijah went over to him and tossed his mantle onto him. He left the oxen and ran after Elijah and said, "Let me please go kiss my father and mother, and then I will follow you." "Go back," said he, "for what would I do to you?" Elisha went back and took the pair of oxen and slaughtered them, using the wood from the ox harness. He boiled the meat and gave it to the people to eat. Then he got up and went after Elijah and became his apprentice.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam tzur kol haolamim tzadik bechol hadorot ha'el ha'ne'eman ha'omer ve'oseh hamdaber u'mkayem shekol devarav emet v'tzedek al haTorah v'al havodah v'al hanviim V'al yom haShabbat hazeh shenatata lanu Adonai Eloheinu likdusha v'limnucha lechavod ultifaret al hakol Adonai Eloheinu anachnu modim lach umvarchim otach yitbarach shimcha befi kol chai tamid leolam va'ed Baruch atah Adonai Mekadesh HaShabbat.
There's so much richness in both the Torah and the Haftarah. It's like, where to begin? Well, if anyone wants to touch on something that you know is in our Torah portion that's not what I'm focusing on today, that's fine. Today I shared with some people a little earlier. I gave a little bit of a commercial last night, so we might have people tuning in about finding out why Joshua was chosen as Moses' successor. And we just read in the Haftarah about Elisha, who was going to become Elijah's successor. But there's other connections between the Haftarah and Torah. But just thinking of that successor, I also love the play on words. The successor, there's something about success, right? It has the same root. So the question is, why Joshua? Why Joshua? So the verses I read this morning in the Torah that come from the book of Numbers 27, verses 15 to 23 explain. And so here's the translation. Moses spoke to the Eternal, saying,
Let the eternal source of the breath of all flesh appoint someone over the community who shall go out before them and come in before them, who shall take them out and bring them in, so that the Eternal's community may not be like sheep that have no shepherd. And the Eternal answered Moses, single out Joshua, son of Nun, Ish asher ruach bo, an inspired man. So that's how God is describing Joshua. And lay your hand upon him, have him stand before Eleazar the priest and before the whole community, and commission him in their sight. Invest him with some of your authority, so that the whole Israelite community may obey. But he shall present himself to Eleazar the priest, who shall be on his behalf. Seek the decision of the Urim before the Eternal. By such instruction they shall go out, and by such instruction they shall come in, and he and all the Israelite militia and the whole community. Moses did as the Eternal commanded him. He took Joshua and had him stand before Eleazar the priest and before the whole community, and he laid his hands upon him and commissioned him as the Eternal had spoken through Moses. So we learn a few things from these verses that we read in our Torah, and I just translated. One thing that's interesting, not related, is this. We're so accustomed in the Torah to saying, and God spoke to Moses saying. This is the only place in the Torah at verse 15 where it says, Moses spoke to God saying. And I noticed that, but I didn't know, are there other places? And I read a commentary that said this is the only place where Moses is initiating to God the request that there be a successor. So Moses knows, from earlier passages that he's going to die, and he has the wisdom, hey God, who's going to be the new leader? And it's not here, I'm reading into it. Because there's those kids, they complain a lot. It would be good for them to have a leader to guide them. So this is the only time where Moses seeks out God, and Moses is seeking out God for a successor. And what do we learn about Joshua in this passage? One is that he's an Ish asher ruach bo. Ish means man, asher ruach. The word ruach means spirit. Bo is in him. So we know that he is somebody who has spirit in him. The translation in the version of the Tanakh that I was reading was inspired. I don't know if that was the same in verse 18, if that's the same word you had. But what's nice about the word spirit and inspire, right? They have the same English, the same shoresh, the same root. And that is about breath, right? So that Joshua has the spirit in him. And so, okay, what does that mean? We see this, this expression in describing Joseph earlier in Genesis. Pharaoh called Joseph an Ish asher ruach bo. Exactly, he said, what did he say? Ish asher ruach Elohim bo. So Pharaoh was describing Joseph as a man who the Spirit of God is in him, very specifically. And why is Pharaoh saying this about Joseph? Because Joseph was able to interpret Pharaoh's dreams and tell Pharaoh, this is what the first dream means, that there's going to be 7 years of plenty, and then there'll be 7 years of famine, so you have to stockpile and so can feed people. And Pharaoh was impressed by Joseph. And Joseph, of course, does not give credit to himself for the interpretation of the dreams. Joseph gives credit to God, and Pharaoh describes him as an Ish asher ruach Elohim bo. So we've seen kind of this description before in another character in the Bible, and we see it now with Joshua, that he's an Ish asher ruach bo, a man in whom there is spirit in him, or is an inspired man. And then there's a couple midrashim that try to interpret what exactly Ish asher ruach bo means. And the first midrash describes Joshua as a man who had the capacity to stand up to the spirit of each and every one. So if we think about that, somebody who can stand up to the spirit of every person, no matter how they came at him. And you know, being in a position of leadership, there's going to be people who come up and give accolades, and then there's going to be people who come up and complain or give negative energy to them, or response, or attack. And so this first midrash was saying that Joshua was the kind of person who could take anyone, no matter whether they were positive toward him or negative toward him. And that's what it means to be an Ish Asher Ruach Bo. He can stand up to any spirit of the person who's facing him. The second midrash describes a dialogue between Moses and God, in which Moses asks God to appoint a leader, which according to the midrash says, who will put up with each and every person according to their particular disposition. So not only is this person, as in the first one, putting up with the negative or the positive, but Joshua holds on to his convictions in that first one. And in this second one, he has the capacity to get along with everyone, no matter the politics or the personality of the person. So one midrash is about Joshua upholding his politics and staying firm in his convictions, whether he receives negative or positive feedback. The second one is about Joshua being someone who can receive a person no matter their personality or politics. And I was exploring some other personality traits of Joshua. Why is he so wonderful to become the next leader? I like to think of Joshua as a glass half full person. A glass half full, that optimism. When it was the time to scout out the land, right? The 12 spies went in, Joshua went together with Caleb, and while 10 of them said, ugh, it's too much, they're giants, we look like grasshoppers to them, only Joshua and Caleb said, this is a wonderful land with huge fruit. The people might be big, but the fruit, and they had to bear on their shoulders the fruit that they brought because it was so heavy. But they came with a glass half full kind of attitude, with the optimism. And so I see another trait of Joshua's as being that optimistic person. We'll learn later, of course, when we finish the Torah and start entering the next section of the Tanakh, known as the Nevi'im, the prophets, that Joshua is the first book, that it is Joshua who indeed leads them into the land of Israel, and he is able to successfully guide them as a military commander in that. So my question to you is, what is it for you about Joshua that might make him an Ish Asher Ruach Bo? What character traits might Joshua already possess? And what do you think might be lacking in Joshua that he still needs? It's hard to say because we know so little about Joshua compared to what we've already learned about Moses. And what are some of those traits that are important, whether Joshua possesses them or still needs to acquire them, that are important for our leaders today to possess? So I invite you to share some of the thoughts about those questions, about leadership, about Joshua, or if there's some other place in the portion that you'd like to go, feel free to do that as well. Oh, and if you can say your name, please, before you speak.
Yes, Larry Marcus. Shabbat Shalom, everybody.
Shabbat Shalom.
I think it was the thing that we talked about, Shlech Lecha, with the spies, right? That showed his true character. There were things that you've been mentioning. He's steadfast. Though he has majority against him, he stays true to it. He believes that it can be done. He's glass half full, as you said. That's the early part that we meet him. Also, he was helpful during the Exodus as well, and began to have some leadership there as well. Also, it's he can rally people as he does in terms of conquering the new land, or given land. So he has the traits that you need for leadership. He can rally people, but he can bring people together as well. And I think that's important, especially today, given where we are.
So just to, thank you, Larry. So you mentioned specifically, like being able to hold your conviction when you're in the minority. That's something that you pointed out. And Joshua being able to rally people. So those are important leadership traits. Other things.
I don't want to make too grand a generalism, but we have talked about this before, and I think you've heard me say the same things before, that God has certain criteria to pick his leaders. And my best example is Jacob. He was such a weasel. He was such a conniver. And God gave the control of the Jewish future to Jacob. Why? And he's a can-do guy. He can do it. He knows he's driven, and God picks the right. He had to pick Abraham in the beginning. Well, nobody believed there was another God, He picked the guy that was motivated, that really believed it. And it's like you can't fool God. He knows who's truly motivated and who's just talking a good game. He wants a guy leading that can get the job done. And when Joshua said, they're not so big, the land's flowing with milk and honey, he said, this is the guy that's going to get the job done. And I think you could write a book about who God picks as his leaders of the Jewish people. It's just amazing. Isaac was not a strong personality at all. I don't know. I've never figured out why God picked Isaac to be the patriarch of the Jewish people for a while, but I know he always picks people that can get the job done and believe in what they're doing.
So thank you for adding that layer. How is the leader chosen? By God. God chooses who's next. God chose Moses, and when Korach was challenging Moses and Aaron's authority, it was, why am I leader? God said so. How is Joshua being chosen? Moses is asking God to choose, and it ultimately is God who chooses the leadership. Did you want to say something? Okay.
No, it was just Michael Goldis.
Thank you.
It was just brought up in Torah study by one of the people that, like Ivan said, God chose who's capable, or you said it as well, and but that's different than from the priests. The priests were chosen by their lineage or bloodline, but choosing the leaders, like nobody ever heard about Moses's children. It was, so he didn't pick the leaders from the leader's family. He chose the leaders from who could lead. I don't know if
Thank you for thank you for making the distinction. So there are different kinds of leaders, right? So in this case, it's actually by accident. Because I was talking about a king in the succession. I said, tune in tomorrow to see how Joshua becomes king. He wasn't king. He was the leader of the people, but kind of in that role, which is a different kind of leadership of the Kohanim were the priests. And that's definitely leadership, but it's a different kind, and that was through the bloodline. This was not. This was not that kind of, the way we think of often kings being the successor or the Kohanim. It's the sons. It's the, those who are in the bloodline or the inheritance. Interestingly enough, in the history of the Jewish people, Samuel, the book of Samuel, who's a prophet and a judge, he has two sons who should be like the Kohanim and acting in that way, but they are scoundrels, and so the line doesn't pass to the sons. And so that's when the people kind of rally and they're like, they want a king. It's the timing of that is very interesting. That the people want to be like the other countries or the other nations in the area, and they want a king. Just about the same time that they see that Samuel's sons are not going to be the successor in that kind of prophet, religious man setting. Other thoughts?
Two things. Number one, Moses' sons, because he was married to a Gentile. So his sons would, I think, would be pressed to be head of the Jewish community. Might be one of the reasons why they were not selected. The other thing is, I think Moses saw, his foresight to know that he needed a leader to succeed him, but he needed it now so that the leader could also, so that Joshua could also learn from him how to lead the people, impart his wisdom to him, and it helps in a transition, so to speak, of learning your job from the person who held it before you. And especially since God had not spoken to Joshua, the word came through Moses. And I think it was a strike of faith in Joshua to believe that he was being selected. And it goes to show his belief in God and a belief in people and belief in Moses. So it showed his strength right up front.
Thank you. You really have me thinking about the comment you made at the beginning, which was just sort of a passing comment, but it struck me about Moses' sons being born of a non-Jewish woman. She was Midianite. What's interesting, that could be one factor, but we hear nothing about Moses' sons. We don't even know it. If we're comparing personalities of Joshua and Moses' sons, we don't know anything about them. And yet, in Judaism, in the Torah, it's definitely patriarchal. And it's only much later in Jewish history that the definition of, traditionally, of a Jew is you're Jewish if your mother's Jewish. So that's that's just an interesting comment to note in the big picture of this whole leadership passing on. But we know nothing of the sons of Moses, except that it was Moses' wife who made sure that they were circumcised, right? So thank you for sharing that as well. Other thoughts about leadership, specifically Joshua, or other thoughts of other parts of the Torah portion this morning? So some of the traits that I admire in Joshua are that he was that optimistic person. It is a challenge when you're in leadership to be able to stay firm in your conviction and be that minority position and stand your ground in your principles when people are coming at you with, but don't you see how impossible it is? And that he could also receive all these different people. And so I think of those as traits I might look for in a leader. But I think we could take the word leader out. And these examples of character traits are challenges for us as human beings, as individuals, in getting along with others, right? It's important if we're in debate to listen to another person. Maybe they want to convince us of their argument, but if we really have certain convictions, can we stick with those convictions even if we're in the minority? and to try to welcome all people, even if their personality or politics is different from us. And throughout the whole thing, to be like Joshua and have that glass half full, that optimistic look on life. Shabbat Shalom.
We turn now in our Siddur to page 374. As we return the Torah to the ark, as we are able, we rise. 374. Larry, you want to come up and help?
Yahallelu et Shem Adonai, ki nizgav shemo levado, hodo al eretz b'shamayim, vayarem keret le'amo, tehila lecha chasidav, Livnei Israel am kerovo. Hallelujah, hallelujah.
At the bottom of page 375. When Torah entered the world, freedom entered it. The whole Torah exists only to establish peace. Its highest teaching is love and kindness. What is hateful to you, do not do to any person. That is the whole Torah. All the rest is commentary. Go and learn it. Those who study Torah are true guardians of civilization. Honoring one another, doing acts of kindness, and making peace. These are our highest duties. But the study of Torah is equal to them all because it leads to them all. Let us learn in order to teach. Let us learn in order to do. Eitz chaim hi lemachazikim ba v'tomcheha meushar deracheha darkei noam v'chol netivoteha shalom. Hashivenu Adonai Elecha b'nashuva Chadesh Yameinu kekedem. We remain standing as we turn now to page 586. 586 at the bottom of the page for Aleinu. Aleinu l'shabeach l'adon hakol, latet gedula l'yotzer breshit, shelo asanu kagoye haratzot, belo samanu kamishpachot ha'adama, shelo sam kolkenu kahem, v'goralenu kechol hamonam, v'anachnu korim, umishtachavim umodim, Lifnei melech malchei hamlachim hakadosh baruch hu shehu noteh shamayim v'yosed aretz umoshav yikaro b'shamayim mima'al ushchinatu zo begovhei meromim hu Eloheinu einod emet malkeinu efesu lato kakatu b'torato v'yadata hayom v'hashevota elevavecha ki Adonai hu Elohim b'shamayim himahal v'yal ha'aretz mitachat einod. On page 591,
ונאמר והיה אדוני למלך על כל הארץ ביום ההוא יהיה אדוני אחד ושמו אחד.
As we